Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched The Muppets from 2011. I'm not going to go too far into a whole history on The Muppets and my feelings on The Muppets, but let me just say that the Muppet Show, the show from the 70s, has a very special place in my heart. I think it's very precious, and I think it ages mostly pretty well. And it's been a while since I've watched it, but it's definitely a nostalgic watch for me. Likewise, a bunch of the Muppet movies that were made during the 80s and 90s are nostalgic for me and for a lot of people of my generation, I think. And there's a lot of weird things going on with the Muppets in terms of the IP. Disney owns the Muppets. I don't know exactly when that happened, but they have owned the Muppets for a while, and they didn't do anything with the Muppets. Now, half the reason I watched this film is because I was talking to somebody recently about the Muppets attractions at one of the Disney parks, and I forgot or blocked out that Disney owned the Muppets. Because to me, the Muppets were always charming and approachable, but at least a little bit subversive. They had that sort of scrappy thing to them, that sort of willingness to make slightly off-color jokes and do some like very adult humor things, but in such an approachable way that they wouldn't bother anybody. And they really hit that sweet spot for a really long time while still being very watchable by kids for the most part. The idea of Disney owning the Muppets just sort of rubs me the wrong way. And I'm not going to pretend I don't have a bias there. I love the Muppets. Don't like Disney so much. So that's not to say that I went into this with a particular bias. I went into this hoping very strongly and believing, because it got a lot of good reviews, that this movie was going to be a positive relaunch of the Muppets of a sort. Because this movie came out, I swear I picked this movie up when it released, but that was 12 years ago. So I don't know what to do with that information other than to feel old. Because clearly in the subsequent 12 years, not much has been done with the Muppets. Now, apparently there's something in some of the theme parks now, but I mean, that's just Disney. They just monetize the shit out of everything. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I went into this hopeful, and I did not come out, to be fair, completely disappointed. Not that I was expecting to. Like I said, I went into this with genuine belief and reasonable expectations. And unfortunately, the more I think about this movie and reflect upon having watched it, the more I kind of dislike it. Or at least, at the very least, see it as a massive missed opportunity. Because the Muppets are iconic, and they are very nostalgic for a generation of people, especially who are around the age of already having had kids or having kids in the next few years. And rebooting the Muppets at a time when the generation who watched them is going to be introducing their kids to media seems like a great opportunity if I was going to take the most like cynical monetization viewpoint of it. And I just am not entirely sure what this movie wanted to be, what it wanted to do, or who it wanted to be for. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it in comparison to the other Muppets films, but not specifically directly. Not in specifics, more in generalities. And in particular, I need to draw the comparison to the Muppet movie from 1979, the first movie that was made with the first cinematic release, full-length cinematic release with the Muppets, and arguably their most iconic film and a very iconic film in general. Because this movie makes ample use of the same beats, but with none of the charm. So how do we go about this? The core plot is actually kind of hard to follow. The start of the movie introduces us to Jason Segel and his brother, who is a puppet. We're just going to call him a puppet. I don't think they actually ever say what he would be considered, because there are no other puppets that aren't Muppets. Like, in the universe, we're already falling apart in, like, the very first scene, because this movie refuses to respect your suspension of disbelief. In all of the other Muppet movies that I have seen, and I've seen most of them, I think, there is a very obvious concession that Muppets are just treated basically as people. That's kind of the whole appeal, because you have the Muppets playing their various roles, and they are playing against real actors. That has always been normal. And those real actors may have, may make concessions in the world of, like, oh, you are a Muppet, and therefore, like, certain aspects of physics, pain, and, you know, normal human things do not apply to you as a Muppet. And everybody's just sort of okay with that and doesn't acknowledge it explicitly very much ever. They just sort of do. But when you start the movie by saying this normal human being who grows into a 30 or 40-year-old man is literally the brother of this other puppet that is not a Muppet, and there are no other puppets that are not Muppets visible in the film, I don't think. It raises a lot of questions that don't need to be raised. In fact, I am going to go ahead and say that the entire plot involving Jason Segel and Amy Adams needs to be removed from the film, because it does almost nothing other than busy it up and add confusion and questions that don't need to be asked. So, the remainder of the film is a very, very basic plot of... I'm going to spoil the plot because it's not much of a plot. It's because it's a plot they've used before as well. The plot is evil person is trying to destroy the Muppets, and they have to do a show to raise money to save the show. That's it. They've done it before. They've done it multiple times, in fact, and usually it works really well. But there is too much going on in this film, and there is no depth to much of it. So, too much time is spent on Jason Segel and Amy Adams and the brother, and a sort of triangular conflict between them, where Jason Segel loves his brother too much, and Amy Adams feels alienated, and it's a whole thing that goes nowhere because with everything else going on, this is a children's film. Like, it is very, very much pointed at very young children. And I'm going to say that based on both the writing and like the overall arc of the writing, as well as the overall arc of the plot, as well as the writing itself, because the writing is largely very simplistic. That said, a vast majority of the comedy and gags and the elements that make this the Muppets are hollow, and they are basically there for nostalgia bait. They don't really make any new jokes at almost any point in this film. It is essentially a rehashing of 50-year-old jokes, just straight up. It just puts them out there and is like, you remember that joke, right? It's still funny, right? Because of your nostalgia? You like the Muppets, right? Here we have your Muppets. And it doesn't feel so awful that it feels like it doesn't feel like somebody else putting on the puppets, you know? It doesn't feel like somebody is just grotesquely scraping the IP to use it for the sake of its money and not respecting any of the original content. It doesn't do that, but it does feel like a cheap nostalgia grab. That it is relying almost entirely on a combination of nostalgia and fourth wall breaks that are not going to, for the most part, not going to hit with anybody who doesn't already know the Muppets, or at least not hit very well. And even for people who do like the Muppets, if they really like the Muppets, I think the lack of depth here, is going to be very apparent. And it makes me cynical about the whole thing because I want to like it. I want there to be new Muppets. I want there to be a revival of the Muppet Show. I want there to be an adaptation of the Muppet Show that modernizes it, because the Muppet Show is basically a take on a type of television show, like the variety show, that hasn't existed in like at least 30 years, if not 40 or 50. The variety show on like network TV is a dead medium. The closest thing we have to it is late night talk shows, and it pales in comparison. Variety shows haven't existed for a very long time, and even people in my generation mostly weren't alive when they were a thing. So understanding why the Muppet Show exists and what, in fact, it's making fun of in the first place is like already kind of a big ask. So having this seemingly targeted at a combination of people who are going to be nostalgic but hopefully know better and expect more, and a bunch of their kids or kids in general who are not going to care as much and need to have new investment given to them to make them care about these characters. It does neither particularly well. In fact, because so much of the appeal of the Muppets is at least in part to its musical guests or its musical acts, the music is not that great either. And I kind of hate to say that because the music was done by it's killing me now. What's one of the Flight of the Conchords guys, I think. And The songs are fine, but they're not great. The best ones, and admittedly, I'll concede some of this is nostalgia talking, the best ones are refreshed versions of songs from 50 years ago. And there's like one new song that I think works in context, but is not super memorable on its own. So it's got almost the right elements. In addition to all that, this is I don't. This movie must have been at least a little bit expensive, and in no small part because of the star-studded cast. Because this movie is full of movie stars from various eras. And that is also bizarre. Because, yes, the Muppets have always been about having guest stars on the show and then a few famous actors in each of their movies. But the reason the famous actors were in the movies they were in was because those actors were good actors and they could act alongside Muppets. That's what makes the Muppet movies so charming, is it's the Muppets and great actors, and they are acting against each other, and a great actor is capable of treating a Muppet not like a Muppet. They treat them like another normal character, and it's wonderful to watch. This goes the other way, where these famous actors are only in there basically for name recognition. Most of them don't even interact with the Muppets. They interact with each other. Or majority with each other. I think the only exception to that basically is Chris Cooper, who plays the primary antagonist, and does a very good job of it, and unfortunately is dramatically underwritten, so he doesn't really get enough opportunity to actually be the antagonist against the Muppets. So you've got all these cast members who are there basically only for their Hollywood recognition, who do nothing or very little with the Muppets themselves, and meanwhile it all distracts from the Muppet plot. Now, if this movie had just been new puppet wakes up one day, has a crisis of purpose, goes to Hollywood, finds the Muppets, tries to revive them, and they have to foil the evil plot to ruin the Muppets. That actually works okay on its own. It still needs a lot of tightening in the script to make it punchy and to do all the new generation and old generation things that I was talking about before. But that at least excises like probably 70% of the actors that you hired for no reason, as well as cutting out complexities in the plot that don't need to exist. Because that would at least still be a mostly nostalgia thing, that is just rehashing a movie from whatever that is, 44 years ago, 79? Is that 44 years ago? Do I have that math right? 45? Never mind. It doesn't matter. It's mostly rehashing a similar plot to that movie and multiple other movies they've done. But at least it's clear in its intentions. Weirdly, I'm realizing that this has some of the similar complaints I have to Star Wars Episode 7, where it's just, you just did the same thing, but worse and more confusing. But at least Star Wars Episode 7 has the ability to say, well, we introduced some new characters that are actually interesting. This kind of forgets our new character, because there was another movie that came out after this, I think in 2014, that doesn't include Jason Segel or Amy Adams, I don't believe, includes a bunch of other actors, because that's not the point. The point of this movie should have been, let's revive the Muppets IP, let's introduce a new character who gets to be sort of the new generation proxy character, whereas like Kermit was sort of a point of view character for a lot of the original run. Now we have this new character. What is his name? Walter, I think. Completely unmemorable in any respect. Has almost no character development of his own. The world just sort of happens to him, and even though in the text of the movie they say, "Oh, you did it, Walter. You fixed the Muppets." Like his agency in that action is limited. It's so close. It's not that close. It's kind of far off, but it's got some ideas. And it really needed a rework. 2011 was kind of a not a great period for movies in general, and sort of the start of the let's reboot everything era in a lot of different franchises. So I can understand why it happened, but I expect better. I did also just become aware that there's a show called The Muppets that came out in 2015, that is not The Muppet Show, but might be better than this. I don't know. I think I'm just going to have to at least cleanse my palate by going back and rewatching the other Muppet movies, the classic Muppet movies. And I feel kind of guilty about like giving this such a poor response, because is it a bad movie? No, it's not bad. It's just kind of boring. It's kind of boring and disappointing, and it doesn't do a lot particularly well. It's very inoffensive. It's just sort of fine. And you know what? That's not good enough for the Muppets, because the Muppets are great. It's not just another kids IP that you can do like this. It's not okay. Demand better from your media. I'm not going to tell you not to watch this, because it's not terrible. But expect better. Anyway, I was hoping for this movie to be something that would cheer me up and make me happy, because I kind of needed that today, but it didn't quite do that. But it's okay. If you've seen this movie, let me know. Let me know your thoughts. If you've got nostalgia for the old Muppets, let me know that too, because I love and adore them. Thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been your host, the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.